We are working to Chatham House rules. A reminder of those around Chatham House rules, very clearly it's about not actually quoting individuals directly. We are taking notes. We're wanting to bring this thinking together, but it will not be about direct quotes. This is very much amongst us in a safe space where we can really talk freely. I don't think I need to tell you about Zoom etiquette anymore. I think you probably have that. I'm going to repeat yet again that we want you to sign up to the breakout group so that Tamara can actually, at speed, actually organize the rooms. Important to do that because we don't really want to have to make the decision on your behalf. The link has been going in repeatedly over the last half an hour, but you might want to put it in one more time tomorrow because we've just had a few people joining in the last minute or so. And the last thing I wanted to say in terms of housekeeping today was about videos, because we had a great proposal to show a number of other videos today, videos from your organizations. And I just wanted to make it clear that the videos that we've chosen are actually not from any of the organizations present in the room, either members or non-members, partners. And we did that intentionally. But what we would really love to do is to collect the videos that you would like to propose, that you think are on message for what we're doing in the SPD. We can pull those together and we can do a screening for the time it takes, probably 30 minutes at the end of today. Ellen's already suggested a video. One of the other videos that we certainly had in mind, which Folu is one of the sort of co-authors of, and Scarlett, you can correct me around this if you like, is the Nature Now video with Greta and George, if you like, the sort of the Greta George Nature Now video, which is really excellent. So if you have videos that you think that you would like us to screen, but also that we can compile and share within the participants pack, just put the link in into the chat and we will be able to sort of pull those together. I think that is probably it on the housekeeping. Claire?
I don't know. Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Very well, perfect.
Setting up the technology. So just want to welcome everyone and thanks again for joining. Just briefly repeating the antitrust statement reminder to please avoid any discussion and any conversation of competitively sensitive topics, such as pricing and costs, bid strategies, future capacity additions or reductions, customers and output decisions. And thank you again for respecting this. It is very important to us and we share the slide before any meeting. So looking forward to the session.
Thanks a lot, Claire. So I'm just going to take like sort of 4 more minutes and then hand over back to Claire. We've got a short video to start right now. Some of you might have seen this one, others haven't. This went out, was banned, which was really interesting, but actually had a huge viral following on social media, partly because it was probably banned. Let's have a look at it.
There's a orangutan in my bedroom and I don't know what to do. She plays with all my teddies and keeps borrowing my shoe. She destroys all of my houseplants and she keeps on shouting, ooh. She throws away my chocolate and she howls at my shampoo. There's a orangutan in my bedroom and I don't want her to stay. So I told the naughty orangutan that she had to go away. Orangutan in my bedroom, just before you go, why were you in my bedroom? I really want to know. There's a human in my forest and I don't know what to do. He destroyed all of our trees for your food and your shampoo. There's a human in my forest and I don't know what. Took away my mother and I'm scared he'll take me too. There are humans in my forest and I don't know what to do. They're burning it for palm oil. So I thought I'd stay with you. Orangutan in my bedroom, now I do know what to do. I'll fight to save your home and I'll stop you feeling blue. I'll share your story far and wide so others can fight too. Orangutan in my bedroom, I swear it on the stars. The future's not yet written, but I'll make sure it is ours.
Thanks, Dr. Mara.
There's a ram.
Oh, I don't need to say it again. So I'm going to, again, trying not to comment on the videos because I think you can really make your own, pull your own conclusions to them. But I also wanted to, just as I did yesterday, just a quick story. I mean, literally 30 seconds. I won't give you the long story today as I did yesterday. But as I was walking outside this morning, and as I said yesterday, I'm very fortunate. I live at the moment in rural France, and I walked past my neighbours, and my neighbours happen to be the local cows. And it was a real reminder to me of trying to actually bring reality to the conversation that we have amongst us. So on one side, we're definitely looking, and the Iceland video shows it, we're definitely looking at, you know, at that consumer perspective and the choices that we make as consumers, but we're also looking at the reality of what this really means to the farmers who are also working, you know, the fields here. The local farmers here, they have a dairy of 80 cows. They grow enough maize to be able to, and other grains to be able as animal feed. They sell the milk to the local cooperative. It's quite a typical French, relatively small setup, and it's a struggle. And of course, they work every day of the year. So it was just, to me, just a reminder of just, you know, the stories of where we're looking at and who we have round the table here, but also who we don't have round the table. So I'm going to move on quite quickly from there into just a reminder as well that we did also have some messages that came up yesterday. So we want to just recognize that those are the messages that came up at the end of the day from yourselves, which are on the whole really positive. There's some things that we still really need to be paying attention to, and a lot of unpacking and digging into and getting more specific that we need to be doing during the day today. We went quite a long way yesterday, and Claire will talk more to that, but we actually just a reminder that we started quite broadly, trying to actually talk about where are we starting from and what is our destination, to then starting to unpack these three big issues and to start to make some sense of them. Do you have the next slide? This is where you come to right now. Again, we just did a quick copy paste of the day 2 check-in. And again, it still resonates with what came up last night. The idea that we really need to pay attention to the trade-offs. We need to actually be able to be bold in what we're doing. Again, this trade-off of free choice versus stricter rules. We're going to have a lot of that discussion happening today. And an excitement around the room. And I'm really pleased to see that there is that excitement, particularly around genuine open dialogue, which again, we had Patrick talk to yesterday at the end of our session yesterday. I'm going to hand over to Claire right now just to pull that together before we start our next session.
Thank you, Amanda. This morning, the team met and we had a brainstorming discussion about really what came out of yesterday, in addition to all the notes that we have seen and reviewed. And it was quite a powerful and positive discussion. And these are just some of my brief thoughts from yesterday. So one was what we found surprising and powerful was that they were actually considering the diversity of background and organizations that we represent. There was actually quite powerful convergence of issues in alignment and also around timing. In the evening, I was scanning through the news just to see what happened during the day, and there was a New York Times article talking about changing consumer behavior and how that has accelerated during COVID-19. Tamara will share it in the chat so that you can also read it later, but it was really interesting because it was talking exactly about what we're working on. So timing is perfect. The other thing is what I was realizing from the comments and what we saw, that there seems to be a growing interest in having joint efforts from business and civil society to talk to governments, and that the Food Systems Summit could be a unique opportunity for the business voice to be speaking together and to be aligned on issues. Patrick Caron's thoughts around the combined need, and he had phrased this in a pyramid scheme, and he mentioned global regulation, national legislation, and local innovation, and that we shouldn't be approaching issues in a vacuum. How he talked about food environment and drivers. They were very, very powerful and helpful. Again, we have a very impressive and diverse group of participants who also have, through numerous reasons, a strong focus and background on the Food Systems Summit. So again, that's just really good. We were really appreciative about the collaborative spirit of this dialogue and the openness and transparency and the willingness to have difficult conversations. And our hope would be that today the focus will maintain that spirit, regardless of how complex the conversations will become, because as we drill down more, go more into detail, it will become a bit more complex, but keeping that spirit, and also we shouldn't aim for consensus by all means, but that seeing that convergence and that alignment, that was really inspiring. So thank you again, and looking forward to the day today.
Thanks a lot, Claire. And just before we get started on our first sort of proper session of the day, a reminder of what we're doing. Following this, we've done a little bit of taking stock. Again, as always, feel free to respond, to react, to agree, to disagree, use the chat. Can I just say, I am also really welcoming the multiple cats that are on the screen today. I can see Ennon's, but I saw Scarlett's a bit earlier as well. Tomorrow's share's heard already today, so I'm just saying there's a side comment. Cat's very welcome, as is anybody else. We have a roundtable that we're about to start, which is really going to be sort of what I would call the stories from the field, real stories about where policy action really has been successful or looks like it can be successful. We'll then actually do the deep dive, and a few people we were chatting before we started formally. This deep dive is going to happen largely in breakout groups, which is why we've been wanting you. We still would like you to sign up to the breakout groups if you haven't. We've been sharing the link. You've had the link in an email. We'll have those breakout groups for over an hour today, and then we'll come back and have what I'm calling a touch point, a way to check in across the three groups, to check in for alignment, to make that progress update, to see actually if we can actually need resources from each other. And there might be somebody in another group that you need to pull into your group to actually use their expertise, their insights. This idea that we have a common critical eye. These will not be finalized at all, because tomorrow we will continue working up through the deep dive today, so that we actually come out by tomorrow, towards the end of tomorrow's sessions, with a pitch from each of these three groups. And then we'll land today, as we said, we aim to finish at 6:30 at Central European time. And I'm starting to see some video ideas coming in, and also if we can organize a video screening for those that want to come for a video screening at the end of the day. We'll certainly compile the videos as well. That's what today looks like. You have that in your packs as well. So can we just have the next one tomorrow, which is what this looks like a little bit in your packs and in more detail with the session numbers and everything else. Any comments or questions at this point? Excellent. I'm trying to stop myself from moving forward too fast. Okay, in that case, let's move into the next session. I'm going to change my hat a little bit. I actually could change my hat. Here we go. I'm literally going to change my hat. Here we go. I've just changed my hat. I'm now in moderator format, because we are now going to enter into our round table, and I'm going to invite Ralph and Sebly. I love it. Sebly's even getting up because she's actually going to come and join me on the round table. And we've got really about 30 minutes for this round table. There are 3 questions that I'm going to be putting to Ralph and to Sebly. They both come from very different, not only different backgrounds, but particularly in terms of where they actually are sitting, the organizations that they're working for today. So just, I guess, a quick reminder of who we have. And Ralph and Sebly, just, you can shout me down if I present you in not quite the right way. But starting with you, Sebly, you're working today as the East Africa Communications and Knowledge Management Officer for CCAFS, which is one of the CGIAR programs. It's the program on climate change, agriculture, and food security. And so you're working on a whole range of multimedia projects, narratives, looking at climate resilience across food systems and livelihoods. At the same time, you're also, to thank you for the thumbs up, not wrong so far. At the same time, you're also this extraordinary climate and sustainability activist working directly on the ground, working with Women for Climate on a mentoring program, on single-use plastic, on, my gosh, I'm going to forget, sustainable transport. So I'm not quite sure how you fit everything into your day, being both on the ground, in the field, and also working on a global program with a focus on East Africa. So that's Sebly on one side. Great to have you with us. Ralph, who we also have with us, who is a fine engineer scientist who has been with Evonik since 2003 and more, well, not so recently, but has also been working on the sustainability side of Evonik. Ralph, you'll have to correct me, since 2017? Something like that.
Yes, sounds good.
Thank you. So that, as long as I don't make it up completely. And then moving into this really interesting position of sustainability in Evonik, which is very much about integrating sustainability across the 4 divisions of the company so that it's really strategically at the center of what Evonik is doing, which is extraordinary and I'm sure very challenging. What I'm going to ask each of you to do is just talk for 5 to 7 minutes about where you see and what you see to be some of the success factors in really influencing policy, and particularly where that actually really does shift the way business is able to really play a positive role as a contributor to sustainable, healthy diets. Sebly, do you want to start? And then we'll bring Ralph in. We're hoping that we might get Laura Barnaby joining us towards the end if she can make it, and we'll see if we can get a story from her as well. Laura's joining us from her sort of in Unilever with AFOOT and WBCSD as well. But Sebly, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Also, I wanted to share one image. Is that fine? Or should I send it to you?
No, that's fine. Tamara, do you want to just stop sharing your screen and then Sebly can share hers?
Okay, are you able to see many seeds?
Yep, very good.
Okay, great. So my name is Sebly, as Amanda already introduced, and I wanted to share a story of conserving seed diversity as a key first step or stepping stone to ensuring that we have healthy and diverse diets and biological diversity that can promote farmer resilience and improve ecological outcomes. And I think this is a really critical and important entry point to ensure seed access at the smallholder farmer level, which is in large part who's feeding the world. And I think also to connect this to the climate emergency, when we saw 3 years ago the global seed vault in Norway, the permafrost around that melting, it kind of re-emphasized the importance of conserving biological diversity in the face of climate change. So the specific story that I want to highlight is one that I was able to experience firsthand in Uganda and in Kenya, which is a project that is called Generating Policy Support for Biologically Diverse and Climate Resilient Agriculture. It's led by the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, of which CCAPS is a partner, and there's many local or national partners such as the gene banks, the national gene banks and national research organizations, etc. And it's supported by the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture of the FAO. So specifically, I'm going to talk about the efforts to increase the use of seed and crop diversity for climate resilient seed systems in Kenya and Uganda. And through this approach, there was an increase in access to resilient seeds for about 180,000 farmers in East Africa. And just to give an example of kind of how these different seed systems dominate space in these countries, in Kenya, it represents the majority, although the number hasn't been fully quantified. And then in Uganda, it's up to 85% of the seeds accessed are through informal networks, local networks, social networks. So for the project, using this as a major entry point to try and influence what policy outcomes could be, the project started working on expanding biological diversity of these systems and using the example of community seed banks, which I was able to visit in Hoima in Western Uganda and in Nyando in Western Kenya. And so those are the ones I visited, but the Alliance has created about 10 different community seed banks in the past 10 years and works with farmers to save and use their seed diversity for their own use, for nutritional outcomes, and for producing for markets. And then they engage with the national gene banks to collect missing seed diversity and multiply the seeds in order to restore any lost agrobiodiversity. So now the seed banks contain a range of different seeds, including 20 different varieties of beans, more than 100 of millet. There's bananas, there's maize, there's coffee, there's cassava, pumpkin, soybeans. It just goes on. Chia, all these things. And these we tested and selected by the farmers as best performing for different agronomic traits, including early maturity or higher yields or tolerance to pests and diseases. And then there's sort of mini governance structures that are created around these seed banks to have seed bank managers and rules on return and people in charge of quality and distribution and guarantors for defaulters, although there are backups in the national gene banks. And the return policy of whatever you take, you must return the double. And then there's trainings and certification processes for the farmers. So for example, in terms of how it's linking to consumer outcomes in Kenya, there was kind of an intention to increase consumption around green leafy vegetables to improve health and diets of the population and create a market around that. And then connect these also to urban centers, to school feeding programs, to school gardens, etc. And then there's also seed fairs. This is a photo from one of the seed fairs where farmers bring their diversity and kind of compete on who has the most diverse seed collection. I want to read one of the experiences of feedback from a farmer in Uganda who said the following: some varieties were getting rare and some varieties were no longer grown. So we decided to mobilize seeds from different regions. We are making sure the seeds don't get lost, especially the indigenous ones. We realize that some of the local varieties are disappearing. They're no longer grown, but they are resilient and nutritious. So we decide to grow them to keep multiplying them so they don't get lost anymore. So these.
I'm just going to interrupt you because our time
Sorry,
is
too long. Okay.
No, it's not too long. I just wanted to ask you on the policy side.
Yeah.
What does this mean? Because I think we've got a really good sense of what this means from the farmer side and taking the seeds into market. But what does this mean in terms of policy and in terms of consumer and consumer choice and demand?
Yeah. So in 2018, then the Uganda National Seed Policy came out, which had a specific priority area related to that was kind of connected to this project. So this has become integrated in the policy, which is a priority area around sustainable utilization and protection of Uganda's national plant genetic resources. And one of the strategies for that, to achieve that, is to enhance the development of community seed banks. So that was able to kind of have this direct connection. And I think, although it is a much earlier starting point than seeing, okay, what is the end impact on the consumer, it's important to understand that if we're going to push for these sustainability health diets that are diverse and fall within ecological limits, it has to start from what are the seeds that we have in the first place, and is this a diverse is there a diverse agrobiodiversity, or is it narrowing constantly? So because there was close collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the national research organizations and the gene banks and the extension systems, there was an ability to influence policy much more closely. and then have this result. In the Kenyan case, their seed policy is from 2010 still, but this one, because it came out more recently, was able to kind of connect with the issue of seed diversity much more closely.
Debbie, thanks a lot. I'm sure that is going to first of all, get everybody thinking and wanting to ask you questions. Again, trying to make those links all the way along the value chain, because that's part of where the challenge is, and where policy comes in as the enabler to actually take this to a different level. And so I'm going to let people start to think about their questions, put them into the chat. We'll have a time to be able to bring those to Sebla as well. But while that's happening, Ralph, do you want to come in from your standpoint and tell us a little bit, because it's really interesting that Sebla's even chosen a seed example, and hear from you about where you think and what you think are some of those successful factors in terms of policy within the area that we're talking about. I hope, Ralph.
Well, I think, can you hear me?
Very well, perfect.
Very well. Let me start. Okay. I think I tell you a story for China to show you how things are connected. And whether that is a success story, we can judge maybe afterwards. Now in China, I mean, driven by these affluence growing middle class, there has been a huge growth in meat consumption in the last few decades. And so there was a strong demand side. On the other side, there were a lot of poor people in the rural areas. People often do not own the land, and government policy focus is to put people in rural areas to work, and at the same time also reduce a little bit the migration into cities. And they had this really strong demand side which they needed to keep up, yeah? And which resulted in a lot of meat consumption. So that whole setup has led to policies where it was all about food security, so supplying more with limited resources. And as many of you might know, China has per population not much land, water resources are tight. So it was really a stress for the entire country to have such a food supply, food secure, one focus, and that more or less has led to an environmental disaster. Yeah. And secondly, that has led to a huge surge in soybean meal demand, because all that meat production, mainly pork and also poultry, has grown strong. Has tremendous a huge demand for soybean meal, so you could see effects of this policy also all the way down to Brazil and in the Midwest, where that corn and soy rotation system really depends on these markets. So then what happens? Then you saw signs of trade disputes. So China had a big motivation to become independent from that soybean meal supply chain, at least from the US side of things. And you had a lot of food scandals, because many of these livestock operations were small operations. There were pictures of dead pigs being disposed into rivers and floating down to Shanghai. And so the government really cracked down on small-scale farming, livestock farming people, and then came the African swine fever on top of it. And that has really made some major policy changes. So one thing is the government continues to crack down on small-scale livestock operation because they simply cannot keep up the biosafety protocols and the operational proficiency to avoid spreading of diseases. So we see a very strong consolidation with large producers on the pork side. Maybe some of you have seen these pictures of 5-story sow houses. Yeah, lot of technology, lot of, let's say, intensified production, but very resource efficiency. So and of course, also in the past years, the government has formulated minimum protein content in feed, which has led to a situation that all all the feed manufacturers were trying to get as much protein in as possible, and they have changed that. They said the recommendation is we have to limit the protein content in feed because it leads to a really excess of nitrogen. So we see a strong surge of feeding concepts which lead ultimately to lower emissions. And so that combination of, let's say, trade issues, a pressure to reduce emissions on the environmental side, and a pressure to tremendously increase biosafety proficiency, overall has led to a fundamental change in industry structure with a fast growth of very large producers which are very resource efficient. But I know probably in this, and also in this group, this really is it's efficient, it's per animal a much lower burden on the environment, but it does not really fit to the picture that many Europeans at least have on sustainable livestock operation.
I mean, Ralph, it's a brilliant example. Again, we're looking from, I would say it's a brilliant example because you're pointing to a lot of those different trade-offs is what I'm hearing from you through the example. I guess the one question I would put, and then we'll open it, because we've got a little bit of time, we'll open it to everybody for their questions and comments from these two really contrasting stories. I guess the one question I'd put is, you know, sitting where you sit in Evonik, you know, we're clearly interested in China. How much influence did you have in that policy progression as a business, or other businesses that you share in that both competitive and pre-competitive space? Was this something that policy was set much more from the top, if you like, by government, or did business and business in coalition, business with partners, actually was it able to influence that space? Because that's part of what we're looking to understand here as well.
I think our learnings in China was we had some minor level of influence, I would say, working together with academia. So we of course have worked over the years with academia in China to develop feeding concepts that address environmental issues and address animal performance issues. Because no one in China likes to work with European or US data, they want to generate their own knowledge. Mm-hmm. So there has been a long-standing history with academia. And then when the government decided we need to change something here, they of course approached their own academia. Yeah? They were not, of course, asking for businesses, because every business tells them the solution they want to sell, but they're working with academia. So we felt we need academia in that dialogue as a credible voice. So we were working with academia and to say these are probably the best solutions, and at least we cannot solve that trade-off issue, but we can tell you if you want to have resource-efficient pig feeding, this is how you should do it.
So I'm going to ask one more question on that, and it's the same question I was really asking Sebly, because we're here looking at from the consumer perspective. They're very much so far, Ralph, a production story that you're giving us. How much did consumer, that sort of downstream consumer demand or consumer interest, play any part in policy considerations, or was that something that was sort of negligible, and it was all about what is actually happening on farm?
No, I think it plays an important role because it's important for policymakers. I mean, Chinese people love pork. Mm-hmm. And when the pork supply crashed down by 30%, pork prices doubled worldwide. And so that puts policy under pressure to ensure supply. The other thing that policy reacted very strongly on were on food scandals.
Yep.
So, you know, if it was all over the place, I mean, I think in many countries, food is something very emotional that is very close to your heart and to your home. And if food scandals happen, that really moves things. And dead pigs floating down to Shanghai, these were pictures no one wanted to see.
Yeah.
And that's when they finally cracked down on all the smallholders, because and that sometimes also is a discussion: how much authority does the central government have over the provinces? And that also changes over time. But as these, let's say, problems mounted up, I think the central government rigor on giving these policies and enforcing some of them and working with industry increased. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Really useful again, and I'm not going to apologise for pushing everybody over these days to come back to what that means actually from the consumer perspective, because actually that creates so much more clarity in your sort of follow-up answer just now. I'm going to open the conversation right now to the group as a whole, and if you have comments and questions, I can see that Mario is already getting started. It's great having Mario, because you already had most of the day. You're coming into your evening right now. You are in your evening, to be able to actually sort of put forward, your comments and questions. Again, we've looked at two very contrasting situations, but both where, from what I understand, the consumer has a really important role to play, whether it's about uptake from markets in terms of seed diversity. Actually, does this actually appeal? Do we really want to be using these, buying these, become grow as much as they like, but they need to be able to sell that in the market, to what is actually the demand of the consumers as a whole, in terms of as they're seeing negative images, as they feel that their diet in terms of their expectation is now being threatened. Mario, do you want to jump in to get us going? And I'm very happy if people want to put their hands up or jump in, but hands up is always better if you can, and I can follow that in the chat. Mario?
Okay. I think that the consumer plays an enormous part in the decisions of how production gets arranged. And this is because, especially if you go to low and middle income countries, a lot of the food supply is still coming from wet markets and from very local markets. Still, the relative proportion of processed food relative to the total consumption is, although it is increasing, is and in the next couple of decades, even though it's going to increase, the supermarketization and things like that will not be the main and most important supplier of food. Even in places like Southeast Asia. In Asia, in Africa, it's been demonstrated the lack of penetration of the supermarket revolution. There's a very good paper by Barry Popkin and Tom Reardon just coming out examining why this phenomenon hasn't really picked up in Africa. Then the consumer, the availability of fresh food for consumers then becomes of paramount importance. On the other hand, on the supply side, we know that smallholders and medium-sized farms are more diverse and are the ones really producing those vegetables, producing those fruits, producing even some of the meat and milk available. So, when I hear consolidation of farming, for example, and policies for consolidating the supply side, we may have negative implications for the diversity of food, which then becomes super important if it's fresh food, because it doesn't go through a processing. If you wanted large farms and you said, oh, well, yeah, but we can process anything and then create different foods for consumers. So, but in low and middle income countries, it's trickier. And it's a central part of policy to really ensure that we maintain that diversity. It's one of the things that I love the slide that Seble put together, because that just shows some of the things that we might lose in markets and so on. And of course, this diversification function has an enormous, enormous other roles: cash flow stabilization, climate adaptation, and you name it. So it's also part of what we need to consider when looking at this whole picture from a policy perspective.
Thanks a lot, Marianne. I can see Ralph and Sabri both nodding their heads and saying, yeah, absolutely.
That's why I told the story, yeah.
Yes.
I know that we all believe this should be the way, but I wanted to explain an example where you see these are real life developments that lead to a different way, and you cannot really dispute them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that's absolutely, it's really key to have, because it means that you're bringing to life all the time when we're looking at policy and policy setting, trying to understand that balance and those trade-offs and win-wins. But to be able to do that, we need to understand what that really looks like. And I think, Mario pointing us towards as well, what research is already bringing to the forefront is really helpful. And Ralph, you pointed to that in terms of needing science, incredible science alongside. And Sabri, clearly you're doing that by actually showing the work of CCAFS and the Alliance in terms of what it's actually doing on the ground and how that works with policy. We have just a couple of minutes left in this session, and I can see that, I don't know if that's putting Laura too much on the spot. First of all, Laura, great to have you with us. And Laura, we've just been talking about some of the sort of success factors in really being able to influence policy, which actually is then going to help business to play an active role as a contributor to sustainable, healthy diets. And I don't know if it's putting you too much on the spot, if you would like to share a very short, over like a couple of minutes, a story from your experience from within Unilever. And you can say no, that you've just come and join us for the breakout rooms. We are a very informal group here and really happy to have you with us. I'll have to see if Laura, who I see she's here, but maybe she just pulled out at the same time. So in that case, she might be having joining problems as well. She's going to be with us, Laura will be with us for the next couple of hours. We just want to make sure that we, again, as we're doing with everybody, we want to squeeze everything we can from you. At that point, then I'm going to again say a big thank you, Sabri and Ralph. You really kicked us off today, absolutely on the right path where we need to be going. I'm going to give you a round of applause. We can have a round of applause from everybody. Thank you. Excellent. You're all getting the hang of this after a few months. And Alan would like to come in with a success factor. Go for it, Alan. I'm never going to stop you if you've got something, a success factor to share with us.
Thank you, Amanda. As a co-facilitator, I can't raise my hand. So that's the funny thing with Zoom. Just to share with you one of the ongoing lessons learned from the One Planet Business for Biodiversity, P2B Coalition, which is a platform that we host at WBCSD. Not all the participants are members of WBCSD, but we are here in a broader set, so I can share some of the things here. One of the lessons learned of a P2B pillar 2, which is about crop and food diversification, and is really that there is a need for the business to demonstrate the social, environmental, health, and business benefits to the policymakers who don't see why, most often, there is a case for crop and food diversification. I mean, there's a need to educate policymakers on the fact that the future of food is not with 75% of our food coming from 6 crops and 5 animal breeds. And I think it's a concept that has been lost in translation by many decision makers, including my former college mate in the French Ministry of Agriculture. So important to mention here, I think, as a success factor, that role that business who has experienced the benefits, the various social, environmental, health, and business benefits, educates policymakers.
Thanks a lot, Alan. It's really good to have those real examples of how and where that works, because there's the theory, and we come into that as one of our assumptions here, but to actually show that there are real examples of where business is working alongside and for new policy, progressive policy, where in some countries and some ministries, there's a resistance for whatever reason to that actually happening. I'm going to close this particular roundtable. Again, thank you very much. We've also had some great chat comments coming in. We're going to move on to the next session, which is now moving us into saying, okay, let's actually get into the nitty gritty of this. Let's have some really real conversations amongst us. So to be able to do that, can we have the next slide? We have, because I couldn't resist, we have one short trailer from a movie, which some of you will know, My Choice. This is I take full responsibility for putting this in. We'll show this and then I'll explain how the actual session is going to work.
The epidemic here is worse than previously estimated, much worse.
The message that's been pushed on us, it's your fault you're fat.
Shouldn't be so hard to get them to run around and play, right?
They have voracious appetites and they don't exercise enough.
It's about how active our kids are.
Forget about it. There are 600,000 food items in America. 80% of them have added sugar. Your brain lights up with sugar just like it does with cocaine or heroin. You're going to become an addict. You end up with one of the great public health epidemics of our time.
This is the first generation of American children expected to lead shorter lives than their parents.
I am 12 years old and my doctors have said that I am a statistic.
We're blaming willpower, that it's a crime.
Over 95% of all Americans will be overweight or obese in 2 decades.
We're toast as a country. The sugar industry is extraordinarily powerful. They're in business to make money, not to keep America healthy.
What if our whole approach to this epidemic has been dead wrong?
The government is subsidizing the obesity epidemic.
We've placed private profit ahead of public health. Systematic political failure.
By 2050, 1 out of every 3 Americans will have diabetes.
Those diseases are being driven by sugar.
This is the fundamental problem nobody's talking about in society.
We could cure 80% of the problem where they prepared the food in the school.
Tomato paste is a vegetable? Really?
Junk food companies are acting very much like tobacco companies did 30 years ago.
I would reject entirely any argument that they are in any way harmful.
Lying through their teeth.
Kids are being told the biggest lie they will ever hear in their lives.
Ronald McDonald never sells to children. He informs and inspires through magic and fun.
If a foreign nation were doing that to our children, we would defend our families.
Years from now, we're going to say, I can't believe we let them get away with that.
We have to change the diet of America.
It's all preventable.
Thanks a lot, Tamara. Again, as I said, I take full responsibility for the choice of movies. Next slide. I'm going to explain how we're actually going to work this next hour and 15 minutes, more or less. The idea is that by the end of the session, we've really progressed into defining the big issue policy asks. When we talk about the big issues, we're talking about these 3 main areas that we're going to be focusing on. The asks themselves, but also their transition pathways. And so for people that are used to talking about pathways and impact pathways, this is normal language. This is not necessarily the language everybody uses, but it's really how do we actually move towards achieving the policy ask, the policy initiative. And yesterday in the breakout groups, you talked, you mixed quite a lot, which was great to see some of what needs to be put in place to actually achieve those policy asks. That's what the pathways really look like. We're also going to have a moment towards the end of the afternoon, my afternoon, to actually do a progress update across the 3 groups and to support and also to challenge each other, what we're calling a touch point. The first thing though is we're going to ask Anna to take us through what does it actually look like in terms of what do we see as the main component that we want you to be looking at in your breakout groups, and then we'll just create those breakout groups and you'll be on your own. Well, you won't be on your own, of course, for 80 or so minutes. Anna, over to you and on to the next slide.
Thank you, Amanda. Because we don't have to put things which are not public, I had to remove my cartoon here with Charlie Brown saying, "Not this again." You saw that yesterday, our theory of change for this policy, science to policy dialogue. Just to say that I seconded Amanda's choice on this video. A few days ago, the French Minister of Environment removed the ban on neonicotinoids to support sugar beet production in northern France, which is ticking for a Minister of the Environment, unticking 2 important boxes about the health and the environmental and the environmental impact. So I think we are really, to me, at the core of how we can help change that policy, very political decisions, which are not necessarily for the common good, which is what policy means. I mean, in terms of etymology. So theory of change, we saw it yesterday. I would like to use it to explain how we're going to operate now in the next the next session. Next slide, Tamara, please. Okay, you'll have to click a few times, but before you click, those are the key components that you will be covering in your breakout groups. Make sure you have time to work your way all the way through. So don't spend all the time on step 1 and building on yesterday's session and anticipating tomorrow's pitch preparation session. We've done it once in 3.5 days, and we've done it on the Fresh Science to Solutions dialogue 3 times. So we know what it takes, but we also know that this is essential for the work we're going to do today. So next click. So first step is that we will have to work on a policy ask narrative. Then we have to go to build that through a series of steps. So you can click 3 times, I think, Tamara. Propose a policy solution, define the relationship between policy and business action, and identify barriers, opportunities, and levers. Then, next click is what's the evidence-based? The first column of our theory of change. And finally, the next click is how we calibrate the positive impacts, synergies, trade-offs, and win-wins across our 4 dimensions of social, environmental, health, and business, or economic, if you wish so. So today, your mission, if you accept it, is to focus on the policy ask narrative, drawing from, next click, a lot of things that was covered to some extent by yesterday, but you may want to come back to those policy solutions, the relationship, hurdles and levers, and then start looking at how we calibrate the positive impacts, which will be more what you can put meat on the bones tomorrow so as to prepare your pitch. What I felt was important here is that these should be used to make sure that in our theory of change, we achieve enough impact. Next click. So those were the impacts that I offered you yesterday in our theory of change. A few tweaks here in red, thank you, that I think we didn't cover so far. How do we address the lower income groups, not only in the developing world, but also in our shaken economies in the global north? Does taste is a means or an end? There were a lot of comments yesterday about taste, but does taste contribute to health, or is it just a means for us to achieve healthy and nutritious diets? And last but not least, which I think we always have there's always a easy bias. We tend to put environment on the production side, whereas this dialogue is more on the consumption side. And the consumption side, we tend to look more at social and health, more than environmental, but we should not forget the environmental. How nice and cool your cows, the cows of your neighbors are, Amanda, and I love your picture, and I've spent years working in those farms in France. They still emit methane. Right, so let's not forget the food environment, the food impact on the environment. With that, I think back to you, Amanda, on how we'll operate.
Thanks a lot, Anna. I hope that's clear enough. We're not expecting total clarity for everybody at this point. That's why we're now going to split into 3 groups. We think pretty much everyone has signed up. If you don't see your name here, tell us pretty quickly. I'm not going to check because I can't do that at the same time as talking to you. And we shall then move you into your breakout rooms. You'll see though that you have always 2 co-facilitators from amongst the SPD crowd. So Alison and Melissa in the first breakout room, Greg and Ellen in the second, Hanana and Scarlett in the third. Again, thank you so much, the 6 of you, for taking this on. Suzanne, Alain and Claire will be in a support role. The rest of us in the sort of SPD team will be, dotted around in there as well. And then as we did yesterday, Abby, Georgia and Matt are going to, as they brilliantly did yesterday, they're going to be using a template to be able to capture the conversation. I think that is pretty much all I have to say. I'm just trying to make sure that there is nothing that's been forgotten. I hope not. Okay, I can see that we have a few people that have just been miraculously added live in here. Tamara, are you ready to split people? The timing, it's now 3:30 Central European time. We have 45 minutes. It's gonna feel that's not true at all. We have 1 hour and 15 minutes. That sounds a lot better. 4:45 is when we are coming back, when you're coming out of your breakout groups. It's always violent, it will be brutal, you will be thrown back into the main room. And we will have then a 10-minute break to get up, to stretch, to walk around, to get your coffees, everything else you want to do. We'll have a 5-minute collective energizer, and then we'll move into some of the feedback. So there will be a 10-minute break directly after this at 4:45 Central European time. Let's move into the groups right away. Are you good there? I can see it's all happening. Right, welcome back everyone. We are on, in my time anyway, 5:05, which is really time to get going. Also, I know that it is a long second day. Second days are always tricky, particularly when we're in that virtual space. We're going to move into the next session, and session 9 is what we've called a touch point. It's not, the expectation is not that we have everything all good and perfect. We know that you've had very rich conversations, but not necessarily managed to actually pull everything together. It is a point in the day, though, to try and make sense and hear back from each other to see how far we've got, what the key messages, the sort of the red threads are starting to look like. And that's why we put on the left-hand side of the screen the sorts of things to listen out for. How robust are we in what we're saying? You know, collectively robust. Are we really ambitious enough, but at the same time feasible? So, you know, there's that real balance to have there. Are we really talking about acceleration towards change? Again, our starting as assumption is that we all together understand this notion of planetary boundaries and how far we're accelerating, exceeding those boundaries. So if we're going to actually start to do something about addressing this overshoot, environmental and social overshoot of inequalities as well, what does that actually look like? And we're talking about that within the policy context. Do we have an evidence base? And that helps us be more robust. And this is why we're talking about a science to policy dialogue, because the science creates the strong evidence base, not on its own. The evidence base as well comes from the experience, the case studies, what we have seen to have worked. And do we have a complete portfolio approach? And that's what we'll hear as we hear from all through groups together. Does this look like it's complete, as opposed to we've actually maybe just forgotten, left off, let slip one area that we need to be actually bringing back in? We're going to be doing that by giving each of the group representatives, and we're going to wish them a lot of luck, and we're going to hold their hands together as they do it, because it's a difficult task, 5 minutes or so to present back. And after each one, we'll then open up for 10 minutes of conversation. So not the way we did it yesterday with Patrick Caron with us, when we had each of the 3 presentations, one after the other. Today, it really is much more of a conversation. Have one group present, open up for a conversation around that, and then go on to the second and then on to the third. At the end of this, we do have a poll to put to all of you, which will just be a temperature check. How well do we think we're doing? And we've got a number of questions, and then we'll actually just wrap that up. And we should have got through that within about, we think, about an hour is the sort of timing around this, so that we can still wrap up today by 6:30 Central European time, my time from where I'm sitting in the world. I'll try tomorrow to shift the times so that they are somebody else's time zone, which I might get all wrong, but at least will be a challenge for all of us. So is that clear to everyone? This is the point where you're putting your thumbs up or something. I'll take a thumbs up from anybody, either on the chat or a thumbs down, anything which gives me a sense of if I am talking to you all or not. Thank you. I see a few thumbs up. You can always use the icons as well, because we've got icons on our participants chat thing. If that's clear enough, good enough, then let's go on and let's ask the first group to be able to come back to us. I think we're going to reverse it this time, also because I've heard about people that are actually going to be leaving us. There's no particular order to any of this anyway, so let's actually start with what is the second group, what we've called the second group, which is a group which Greg and, I've got to make it up now, who were the co-facilitators? Greg and Ellen were co-facilitating on. So I don't know who's feeding back on this one, and I think I am supposed to. I think. Fantastic. And I think, Georgia, you have the slides on this. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes-ish from now. Wow.
Yeah. Ralph already mentioned poor presenter, and I'm not quite sure how I should feed back in 5 minutes all that we discussed.
I would also just like to say, first of all, thank you, Martine, for being voluntold to do this. And then anyone else in the group who wants to chime in, I'm sure Martine could use the support. We've given her a lot of stuff to go through, so
So again, just a bit of guidance here. Rather, we don't need to go through all the detail. We're looking for the key messages and the red threads, the areas which you clearly have come down on, which you've landed, but also some areas which you're also still, which are a little bit still up for grabs. But think about those red threads and key messages rather than all the detail, because there's still a session tomorrow in breakout groups to take this the stage further. We're not expected a finalized at all product at this point. Does that help at all, Martine?
Great. I'll do my best. I'll just kick off and see where we get to. So regarding the policy ask narrative, I think one of the first thing is the link between the production and supply. And also just now we heard about that in other groups, the connectivity between production and consumption was also discussed. So I think the interconnectivity there is really important to be able to demonstrate the value of the food system is an important one. The complexity, and that we need political pragmatism. So how can we develop a common vision? The integration of externalities in a holistic way, so including the prices, or not just the prices, but also value at large to society, and being transparent and traceable sustainability metrics across the value chain that policy can act upon. So we've talked about metrics quite a bit there, and also which indicators and whether in which way we could or should be prescriptive. And also that food loss and waste is important to integrate. So that's on the first one. Proposed policy solutions. So again, political pragmatism, identifying complementary policies that can impact. So we talked quite a bit on that it would be important to make sure that ministries collaborate more on the food system, so it doesn't sit just with the Ministry of Agriculture, for instance. The feasibility we discussed of creating global indicators, but again, also I think point 5, we also discussed the barriers in doing so, and that's quite a challenge. Again, the externalities, so that policy makers could require businesses and could support businesses to internalize externalities, to show the opportunities of having a more healthy food system. Transparency, I think, was mentioned and discussed quite a bit, that it's important to be transparent throughout the value chain. In the end, we also discussed technology, and we didn't actually link that to transparency, but of course there are some opportunities there, blockchain, etc. We didn't touch upon that, but I think could be put there too. Incentives for farmers to diversify crop rotations, I think is an important one we discussed too. And lastly, food waste. So I learned a new abbreviation, EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility for Food Waste, to encourage imperfect fruits, vegetables, etc. to be sold. So those are some of the policy solutions we proposed. Going to the third ask, so what can the business community galvanize around? We discussed several things, actually quite a bit, came up with these 3 bullet points. So the responsibility of business to input into policy development and provide perspectives from across the value chain. We had some very nice examples. This one was an example from the French Food and Agriculture Law. That was left with the Ministry of Agriculture. I think, Alain, I'm happy if you could, maybe if we have time, you could repeat your example. Secondly, the importance of the entire supply chain having a seat at the table, and governments working with businesses to incentivize transformation. rather than adding barriers. And also we discussed the role of business associations, that very often it's different if policymakers talk to just business or their associations, and that these business associations can sometimes have a more negative viewpoint. So how to make sure that these business associations also get on board in this transformation, we think is quite important. And then the barriers. Currently externalities are not sufficiently internalized. I think that's obvious, otherwise they wouldn't be called externalities. Then the current incentives and the policy make diversified production and supply chains risky for farmers and producers. Food safety standards are a barrier. How can we support suppliers to introduce systems? Currently, policy discussions are siloed and do not adequately encompass the entire supply chain and the potential level we can focus on. We need to bring in some technological companies to policy discussions to see how they could be leveraged across the value chain. So that was, we had a point 5 as well. Lastly, we spoke about the evidence base to increase the ties between research and community and business. Of course, this is an ongoing discussion always, how much ties there can be, and that we need accessible science as far as possible. We need brief synthesis to make support decision-making and investment. We identified that quite a lot of companies have collected evidence already that could be valuable to decision makers and that could be leveraged further, and that it should go beyond anecdotal evidence, but and that often this evidence doesn't reach the academic community. So there would be a value in convening companies to share their learning. And that within the scientific community, key assumptions are quite often based on old data, and that businesses are closer to reality. So there would be a value to in some way integrate business and science more. I think that's it on point 5, and we left point 6 open for tomorrow. So I don't know if that was within my 5 minutes, but I hope I did a good job. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Martine. Is there anybody from the group that wants to add to Martine's absolutely brilliant presentation? Thank you so much. In a short time, very succinct, it actually covered a lot of ground. And if not, then this is a time, again, to sort of come back and just to say to the wider group, how does this resonate with you? If you remember, I put at that list of things to keep under consideration, which very much around the 6 components we've got here. Are we ambitious and feasible in what we're putting out here? Is this robust? Is there an evidence base? Have we really talked about impact? Do we see how this is actually leading to and the pathway to policy action? Are there any comments, questions for clarification, sense of where this is linking to others already from the wider group? Ponder over that for
Amanda,
the moment. Yes, go ahead.
Just because Martine invited me to comment on the French example and to make it short, I think we had this law on food and agriculture passed last year in France that started with a very wide consultation where all individuals could contribute on the internet 3 years ago, and initially mobilized different ministries along the whole value chain from production to consumption, including education, health, and so on, ended up in the hands of the Ministry of Agriculture, whose role is to protect farmers and agribusiness. And of course, there was a bias because of that. Those people animating the debates, fostering the discussion to elaborate the law, were biased towards protecting production side, forgetting the consumption side. That was just a sort of add-on to keep the consumers association happy or peaceful. So I would say a biased consultation process where unfortunately business responsibility should have been to defend the whole value chain from consumer to production, and that did not take place. And I think in the relationship between policy and business action, so point 3 here, I think it's critical if we want to play a role in transforming food system, that we feel as business responsible for the whole value chain. And because this dialogue here is about consumption, to reintroduce consumption when it falls off the table of discussion, just because the policy process is biased towards production.
Thanks a lot, Alain. And I'm sure that everybody sitting around our table here has got equivalent examples from other countries or regions or in relation to specific commodities. Because Alain, as you were saying that to me, I was thinking absolutely, as you know, probably 5 other examples that came to mind. So the example in France is clearly not unique of this lack of full value chain thinking when it comes to policy. Just as within our companies, we often work in a very siloed way as well, or as research institutes. You know, it's a real challenge. I am going to invite then Scarlett and Abby to come on for the next group, which is going to be talking to the demand side. And I'm going to hand straight over to you. Again, I will invite everybody else, though, as ideas come to mind, do put them into the chat. I can always pick them up again and bring your voices in with your questions and comments.
I don't think this one was me.
No, it's absolutely not you at all, Scarlett. It's Melissa. So sorry.
Melissa, if you want to get started, and then I can kick in a moment.
Hi, everyone. Yeah. So we're going to do demand next, me?
Absolutely, Melissa. Sorry, my mistake. We're absolutely on demand. It's what's on the screen.
Scarlett's on the ball, which is always good to see. So my co-facilitator had a clash. So what I'm going to do is, I think Alison's back now, so she'll be with us tomorrow. So I'm going to just kind of kick us off and then see if Abby wants to kind of, because Abby did a great job sort of taking the notes. A really sort of rich discussion, I think very much picking up on some of the threads from the presentation we just had. You know, when we were thinking about this issue of consumer demand, what's our policy ask around this? It was very hard to disentangle it from what's happening in the broader food environment. So where we sort of really landed on is, whilst we need to incentivize, and that's a word that came up again and again in the discussion, incentivize an increase in demand for sustainable and healthy food. And we didn't get so much into talking about access to food, but we talked about really the demand side, and at the same time needing to incentivize the increase in R&D and sustainable production of sort of nutrition sensitive agriculture as well. So this all needs to happen together, and at the same time we're looking at incentives. Also this issue of disincentives comes in as well. Because what we really need to focus on is the economics. The economics need to be able to stack up for business to really scale this up. And so on the production side, we really need to look at what are those price incentives or disincentives. And that's why we sort of had to bring that in. And the word paradigm shift was also used. You know, we really need to kind of not sort of look for the levers that are going to just kind of be a small incremental shift, but what are going to be the big shifts around. So we looked at policy options. At the sort of most top level, it's really kind of having that broad integrated strategy from governments that brings together all those different, ministries from agriculture, health, environment, and others, sort of integrated strategies that address both the kind of consumption and production side. We talked about the role of public procurement in increasing the role it can play in helping stimulate demand and normalize. We had a good discussion, interesting discussion on labeling. There isn't a sort of a firm view, or there's a sense that there wasn't the evidence that labeling is that step change, but where we did sort of really discuss, which is something that governments could help look at, is the harmonization, because there is such a plethora of different labels that actually consumers are very confused when they do go to look. So is there a role that government can play to try and simplify the space? Similarly, the role that government can play to help clarify some of the terminology that's being used, that would also help increase the understanding of consumers. So words around like meat substitutes or plant-based, sort of trying to kind of get some clarity around those, or making it clear that companies could use those terms and not be sort of disallowed from using those terms. We also talked about the role of marketing. Are there any sort of regulatory or policy approaches, particularly around marketing of junk food or unhealthy food, particularly focused on children. Again, on the production side, it was a discussion around incentives and removing perverse incentives. So again, that gets to the affordability of sustainable, healthy foods. We then touched on the relationship between business and government, and the important role that business can play in the pre-competitive space to lobby for policies that would again reduce the cost of healthy and sustainable food. And they're a very powerful stakeholder with government to kind of make that case for change. And then just finally, before I turn to Abby to sort of supplement, is on the evidence. We were sort of really being pushed as a group. We had a number of people, from business in the group, but, there doesn't really seem to be a sort of a huge amount of evidence that we had readily at hand that kind of, we can point to these sort of examples of success. So I think that's something we want to pick up again on tomorrow. People will have some more time to think about it, but clearly there isn't the sort of very, very clear evidence, and that's something we're going to need to sort of pull together from all the different markets where we're seeing, these shifts in consumer demand starting to happen, and to start to build that evidence case for action. But now over to Abby to supplement. Thanks.
No, I think that's exactly what we had. We just tried to organize it and structure it a bit. So thinking about what are the areas of consideration that would shift demand from the consumption side. So thinking about what are those key problems in terms of accessibility, affordability, and security, and then what are the policy asks that we can have both from a progressive incentive-based system, both for the individual, the company, as well as the kind of natural environment that they sit in, or the built environment they sit in. And then also, what are the sticks? So what are the pricing that we can put in for externalities? So whether it be a sugar tax from a demand consumption side, or linking it back to the production shift. So thinking about excess nitrogen and phosphorus and environmental demand. And I just think it's good to segment these when we're initially thinking, but then at the end, bringing them together to say, this needs to go into a unified policy, a holistic food strategy that governments can work on, whether it's at an international level and then devolve down nationally, but there are many different stages of government that we'll need to engage in, and businesses have that key role as a key stakeholder. But again, the attractive business case, and if we can move payment systems and think about financing a lot of this, it will unlock everything, because then not just the progressive companies will be involved, but even the companies that are more focused on the bottom line.
Melissa,
nothing else, Georgia. That's the only slide.
Thank you so much. So, maybe we could, there was a few things on the other side, but let's go back to the table. That's perfect, because that really did capture the whole lot. Thank you for your double act of actually bringing that together. Is anybody in the group that actually wants to add to what has just been said? If there's a key point that you feel needs to be re-emphasized, now is a very good time to speak out. We did say in this group, I was listening to this group, that this would be a sort of a collective effort on the feedback. Anybody want to add anything? Perfect, and then do okay. Then I'm opening it up again to questions, comments. Are we starting to see links between now the two groups already? I mean, I guess that is always, you know, the connections are clearly, you know, starting to come out, but it'd be good to be able to see those articulated. And for the others who are not part of this group, is there anything that is specifically missing? This was very much, again, focused on that consumer demand side. And there's a lot of you in this group as a whole who really do have knowledge experience at this. So is there anything major that you think is missing here that needs to be thrown in? Thanks, Ellen. So Ellen's already bringing in, there's a clear link in terms of incentivizing R&D. We've seen it coming out already through both the groups, absolutely. And the role of digital to create transparency. So there's some commonalities in terms of what are the sorts of things that need to be put in place and what are the policies that need to actually enable those. As you carry on, as I said before, as you carry on thinking through this, let's move, because we will have some space right at the end to actually bring this together a little bit more. Let's move into, and thank you again. I do my bit of clapping. If anybody wants to join, that's great. Let's go into the third group. Thanks a lot. I can see Claire was in there. Let's go into the third group, which was looking at that trade aspect. Oh, excellent. Somebody's actually using, thank you, Anna. I'm just going to hand over the mic to whoever is feeding back, because I don't know who the person is that's going to speak right now.
Amanda, that's going to be me, Catherine. Thanks
Fantastic.
for that.
Thank
That's
you.
actually, the previous team is a tough act to follow, but we haven't been so structured. It was really a very rich conversation, and we've put in a lot of the thoughts there, but we could have spent more time, and I guess we do that tomorrow by restructuring a bit and refocusing. But let me go ahead. We started off the conversation indeed that by coming in with trade as a topic, that it would be a must as well to start off by a positive message, a positive narrative that would place international trade next to the need for functioning and sustainable local and regional supply chains. Both of them are complementary. We then looked into what are the added value of a functioning global trading scheme, which is adding to the resilience of supply chains, and that has actually shown to be the case during the COVID-19 crisis, but actually we would also need to maintain that beyond the crisis. We already spoke yesterday about the central role of the need for resilience, and that global supply chains can actually compensate for local crop failures, for example, and add to diversification of risk. There is an opportunity for increasing learning, what works well in some regions and can be applied in others, and that can be related to sustainability, but also in the areas of industrialization. There is an opportunity around the provision and distribution of healthy food, regulation of specific nutrients, also the role of international trade there. Here, the point that I previously made on the chat around digitalization. And again, it's this whole positive trade system, which is a mix between global and local, and some of the points that we've mentioned previously. I started off by pointing out, and you see it as well in the proposed policy solutions, both here we've looked at it from a lens of local trading systems and global trading systems. We see here, and that was a point that Anna made during the conversations, the need for including local stakeholders, local farmers, integrating them into the value chains, whether it's national, regional, or international, but working with the local producers and the local networks. And the opportunity again for capacity building, best practice sharing, local implementation of some of the best practices that can be identified. In trade, to be honest, and I still struggle a bit with it myself, having the consumer lens is not that easy. So here the labeling point is really how can we bring in the transparency that consumers require to really have a sense of what are healthier, more sustainable food options. So the labeling aspect is brought in here to really bring in the consumer value there. I do believe that I saw the true value accounting, true cost of food already mentioned in previous groups as well. Equally so, the global food safety standards, the need for investments, having functioning trading schemes and trading systems depend also on good local infrastructure, be it for transport, be it for storage. Again, to the point of local value chains, the need for fair distribution of value across the value chains was important. The role of data was mentioned previously as well, the role of transparency, and that can be related to carbon footprinting, true cost of food, using of data for certification, supporting innovation in agriculture, and using digital for creating transparency. And then what trade can do as well towards consumers is making healthier food products cheaper through decreasing tariffs. We didn't get to point 5 and 6, but we did do 3 and 4. Yes, indeed. 3 and 4 is defining what is the relationship between policy and business. We actually turn it around and ask ourselves the question, what does business need from a functioning trading scheme, or how does a functioning trading scheme look like for business? And it's really one that is stable, that has developed good food safety standards, where there is capacity building to implement the food safety standards, the need for mechanisms to fight against counterfeit products, for example, the predictability of a trading scheme, also a trade policy that incentivizes policies and strategies. Again, here it's that holistic policy environment that needs to be looked at, of which trade is a part, science-based decision-making. Innovation again, but also innovation not so much from new products and services, but indeed how can, for example, public and private funds be put together to really come up with new financial mechanisms that can bring change into the food value chain. And consumer angle again, how can government dietary recommendations be linked to trading negotiations? That was the last point there. What are some of the barriers? Very much in line with what the previous groups were saying, siloed thinking, lack of education, lack of informed decision-making on the consumer side, not having the right tools to make an informed decision, but also not being informed about how modern food systems work, lack of transparency, the importance of science-based decision-making, and then specifically to trade is really the collapse of the multilateral trading system, which could actually end up disadvantaging, that's not an English word, is it? Putting smaller countries and operators in smaller countries in a negative situation compared to operators in big trading countries. That was a point. There's a lot, but a lot still to be digested as well. But for the colleagues in the group, please add.
So thanks a lot, Katrien. Yeah, there's a lot in there. And is there anybody from the group that would like to add on to this? So as you were talking, Katrien, again, what I think would be really useful is to actually start, and I can see Christian saying that was a great summary. So you're getting support, Katrien, from the group. That's also good. Again, the question is, what do we see? Because it's interesting to see, what do we actually see that's coming out that seems to be these red threads, which is common across all of these three pieces, that is starting to bind or blend these together into, the portfolio that we want to bring together, and again start us to, brings us back into, are we really taking the systems approach that we all sign up to somehow, because that's why we're sitting around this table together, probably. But are we actually being true to that, and are we being true to the ambition the ambition for change that we have set ourselves and where policy plays a role. I'm just, I continue to put those questions out there. I'm not expecting responses right now. Anybody that wants to put their ideas into the mix right now, that would be great. And just a reminder that we are going to be coming back to this again tomorrow. But there are clearly some really sort of clear links across these that are coming together. Anybody want to sort of try and talk to that right now, or even say things that they think need to be given more emphasis? Again, if you're spending your time working in one group, discussing in one group, this is your chance to be able to contribute to the other. I see, Susan, that you've also already put something in terms of on the demand side. I don't know if you just wanted to speak to that quickly so we're clear about what you're suggesting here that we actually haven't brought out enough yet.
Amanda, it was actually, sorry, it was to do with the previous one. I was just adding to the group that I was in. I was just calling out, sorry, no, shall I talk about it now? I've gone back a bit.
It's fine.
No, thank you. No, it was really just to make sure that we think, I know we've put out of home in there, but I think we're talking more about, definitions of categorization of types of foods. But I think we need to think more, think about the out of home sector, not just thinking about packaged food, et cetera, because increasingly across the world, people are eating out. People are eating out of home, having food delivered, and even more so in the COVID environment. But I think I was just really wanting to make sure we thought of the out-of-home sector, which is very large. And if we want to have we want to lead consumers or enable consumers towards healthy and sustainable diets, that's very much part of it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Susan. And it sounds to me that actually fits across all of these three groups, is actually bringing in that whole area of the out-of-home consumption, which links across everything that we're talking about. So good point, really important. Any other points people want to make? Because otherwise we are going to do a quick temperature check with you all right now. Do you want to try putting excellent. We're about to do just a quick poll, just to see, because we want to do it while it's still fresh in your heads, what the three different groups that we've just heard from. So having listened to those presentations, they're not really pictures, that's probably my own sort of thinking already about pictures. How strongly together do you think they actually meet the following criteria? So taking them together, this is your chance to respond to the poll. You need to scroll down because there are 5 questions here. And you just need to make a selection on each one, and then we'll see the results. I think tomorrow we get to see the results instantaneously, if I'm not mistaken.
I'll leave it a bit open, and then I'll close it and I can share the results so everybody can see.
Very good.
I'm just waiting for a few answers to come in.
And while people are responding to the poll, I will...
3 people, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, I can see. You can see at the top, we've got 6 out of 20 so far.
Yep. Try to get 15, 16 would be good.
I'm very ambitious about getting 20, personally.
20 would be amazing. Would be great.
20 would be strong as opposed to moderate at 15.
So 13 people, wait a bit more, and then I'll close the poll.
Okay. Let's wait, and while people are just sort of pondering over this, thinking about this, I'm just going to bring out what's in the chat right now, because it's a great chat conversation going on. And I just want to make sure that it's sort of verbalized a little bit. And Geraldine's talking very clearly about a paradigm shift. I'm just going to read it out, then ask Geraldine if she wants to add anything to it. So she says here, the common thread is government guidelines for healthy and sustainable products that are coherent with trade structures and incentives for ingredients in those products. This is the paradigm shift from today. So I hope that sort of...
Yeah, if I can just add a comment, when I was looking at the second chart in the last trade pitch, I think there was a piece in there around the government guidelines, and I feel we had also kind of touched on that in our discussions, but also what we had touched on is that often, you know, a government guideline might be to say, yeah, you eat these great products, but then actually the cost of those products and the structures that are in place for the ingredients are just totally outpricing those products actually for so many people. So that's just, it's not coherent. So this idea of a kind of a common health, agricultural, environmental policy that's really all knitted together, driving in the same direction, I think is would be the real paradigm shift. So that's what I just wanted to acknowledge.
Thanks a lot, Geraldine. And I think actually it's an interesting that coming straight from that, I'm sort of just seeing as well Laura's point, which also about have we actually been thinking enough about the trade-offs, who will be winners and losers in this shift to new food systems, and this did come up a little bit yesterday, a little bit at the beginning of today, and maybe it's a really good point that as we're actually talking to the policymakers, that this is a real consideration that's put in there. And again, that trade-off question is really related to the sixth component of what was in the template, if you like, today, which talks to, you know, where are the impacts really happening and what do we see in terms of balance of different types of impacts, but also what that means in terms of negative as well as positive impacts as well through promoting a particular policy one over another. And I'm also seeing here, so I'm just, as I read them out, if you want to just supplement, just as Geraldine, just do feel free. Katrina as well saying we're missing a common point about the need for co-owned transition based on principles of open dialogue, collaboration and partnership. And I think, Katrina, it's really important. It's come out a little bit in the three presentations today and was clearly part of the message that Patrick Caron gave us yesterday, at the end of yesterday. And just lastly, so far, Amy saying we should also use the lens when assessing these pitches about our roles as WBCSD industry, and therefore what is most needed from a policy perspective to enable us. So again, this idea about the scope, let's not think we are any old collection of businesses here. I'm trying to paraphrase, Amy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we actually represent the WBCSD members at this point, which is a particular group of progressive businesses.
Yes, and we are not trying to boil the ocean either. So we're not trying to fix all of the world's policy problems. We're trying to look at what are we the best suited to really weigh in on. So a mix between ambition and practicality here. You know, I don't think we're going to solve World Trade Organization issues necessarily. So I think finding the right balance of practicality and ambition, I think, is important.
Yeah, right. So it's a very good voice of reason, Amy. Thank you. I think we're going to end the poll at this point. Let's have a quick look. So just so everybody sees, and in a way, the results of the poll are, you know, are interesting. But it was also just to get everybody into the thinking of have we got a, you know, have we got some compelling ideas coming through so far? And overwhelmingly, they're looking okay, but we definitely have room for improvement. Again, this is my take on reading statistics. Are they both ambitious and feasible? So overwhelmingly, 86%. Moderate but room for improvement. Talks to Amy's point right now, which we need to keep in mind. Reaching that ambition, but making sure they're feasible. And maybe that's something that needs to be thought about quite carefully tomorrow when we go back in tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, evening, whichever time zone you're in. Are they clear? I love this. This gets to the point of yes in the middle. Moderate but room for improvement. do they illustrate impact transition pathways? Are we making these clear about what these look like in practice? I guess is to paraphrase that. And again, I think what's interesting here is that we have some people who are saying, actually, this is just not good enough quite yet. And nobody's saying that we've really got there. And this is clearly, we haven't had that much time maybe to really say, what does this really look like in practice? And some areas are not in others. So it's a red flag, I would say, for us at this point. And the alignment question, I think, is really interesting. And we already noted that at the end of yesterday, we are looking at alignment and convergence here. We came into this as dialogue, and we started at the beginning of July on this journey together. And I think it's really interesting to see that there's been, where the alignment is across the thinking, but also now across this portfolio of policy interventions we're talking about. Let's see how much further we get tomorrow with that. And I love this at the end of the day when the chat gets really frenetic, because it's a sense of, okay, we need to get our word in. It's perfect. It's what it's all about. So also Patrick's there, who is also coming in. A key question is, will citizens, what some of us are calling the consumer, will citizens object if there is no longer any cheap food? This matters because this would be the consequence of pricing negative externalities. And that's a real sort of, I guess that's sort of a moment of attention. If they would, then governments would be reluctant to act, because we know what governments need. And it's interesting that Christian is saying this depends on citizens' income. This is a real debate here, which has now just sort of opened up. And again, I think, we have a few minutes if other people want to sort of jump in around, again, how much are we talking about as a group of businesses supported by research, science, civil society, making policy ask, which we feel is strong enough and can lead the way on for government to be able to act. Does anybody actually want to voice their opinions at this point, or do you want to continue writing? And I feel like I'm doing a sort of monologue. Okay. Continue on your chat at that point then. As I said, I think these are really key questions that are coming, key points that are coming up at the end of the day today. It feels to me though, that this is the moment then when we can start to wrap up the day as you continue on your chat exchange, because it's really important. And to be able to wrap up the day, I'm going to turn to Claire and to Alain to help us do that. I'm going to leave it to Claire and Alain to fight over who's going to actually talk first. Alain, I promised you that you would have the first word today. Thank you, Claire, for agreeing with me.
I know Claire loves to have the last word. Yeah, I was typing at the same time, so difficult to type and think and speak. I'm a man after all. Two things I'd like to say. First, to comment on the impressive progress we made today. The elephants were well identified and spotted, and I think we handled them by many aspects in the different groups. That's my positive side. On the negative side, we have lost some of our Global South friends who were here today, who were here with us yesterday. Mark has not been with us. Mario, who's worked a lot in the developing world, has also had to step out. And the consequence is that my external reading of what came out from the groups, but might be biased because of my long time spent in the Global South, we've had a tendency to consider again consumers as having a choice whereas we mentioned many times yesterday that we have billions of consumers who don't have any choice just for economic or physical access, let alone the influence of marketing, culture, whatever. So important to keep that in mind. And then suddenly I had this vision of a scale, and this is not biblical, but this is just the thing I figured out, where we would have a range of maturity in the dialogue, in the relationship between business, policy, and consumers. And because the maturity of this dialogue, which is more or less educated, which is more or less happening, which is more or less blocked because sometimes governments don't want to have this dialogue or don't want to make it happen, the level of maturity of this dialogue would define the type of policy asks and business action that we could put in place. So I see a global, a possible set of global asks and actions, but I see it happening differently depending on where we are on that scale. And I think a lot of what we say today speak to that level of maturity of the relationship between business, policymakers, and consumers in terms of ignorance, in terms of responsibility, and I'm speaking in terms of positive responsibility, and I think that could help us define what we put in our policy asks when we work tomorrow on our pitches. I think I'll stop here, but that's my end of the day vision, and I wanted to share it with you.
Thanks a lot, Alain, and really useful and be really interesting to also have, I think, across the group, people sort of responses to Alain's proposal of this idea of a sort of a level of maturity of dialogue, looking at business policy and consumers, because it's an interesting way of actually helping us organize what we're talking about, but then also responsibly, positively taking it forward in a way that really is robust and credible. So people's reactions to that we really welcome. You know, again, to digest overnight, but if you feel like it, clearly, I mean, there's quite a lot to digest today, but your reactions would be really welcome. Claire, I'm going to hand over to you as well to inspire us and stimulate us, because that's clearly where we are at the end of the session today.
Thanks, Amanda. I mean, it's hard sometimes to go fully into the inspiring mode after 3.5 hours of Zoom calls, but I have been inspired. I don't know if you can see, but I'm like scribbling notes all over the presentations and that I was following. And I mean, I think the fascinating part, and this has been commented again and again, is the alignment that we're seeing and the key themes and that fits with that framework that Alain was just proposing around the global policy asks, but the national, the local implementation side, which links me to my key part when I was looking at the poll results. I think where we are still lacking, I don't know if we can accomplish it tomorrow, because I tend to be quite practical. I'm like, okay, great, we know the direction, but how do we get this done? What could be a path forward? It would be that path. Almost that path to implementation. I don't know if we can get that detailed. We can work on it more. We have time. So all that will develop. I do think the points about being focused, about this is the business voice. We work, however, with others. And I think this was also that's coming quite clear through all the work that links to my alignment point, that there's surprising interest in speaking jointly about some of these topics to governments. And that maybe we could have, again, the global framework and help build a path for national or regional, national, local implementation. Anyway, just brainstorming on how this could be possibly workable. But thank you again. It's been super helpful. Looking forward to tomorrow. And we also hope everybody here finds this useful, but considering the chat
It does.
So thanks a lot, Claire. I'm not even going to try and talk to what's in the chat right now because it is unbelievably rich. We've covered a lot of detail on what positive incentives actually could look like. And that really talks to actually all of the conversation that happened in all three groups at different levels of where you'd actually apply positive incentives that we had conversations about today. So we need to try and pull that in, and we'll try and pull that in a way that they actually, some of this chat conversation does actually is all getting captured, but it actually gets documented, so you actually get access to it as well when you go into the breakout groups tomorrow. We have something really clear about what a new framework for global food trade based on free trade, only for food, you know, I'm just sort of trying to paraphrase what that could look like. And that really takes us back to the very beginning of our conversation and the very beginning even of the Delphi. I'm going to suggest right now is that we go on to the next slide, which is our whiteboard for today. Just a reminder again, view options, go into view options at the top, click on annotate, and if you want to actually write something, then you click on text and then you put it into the right place, or you start using you can draw it as well. It'd be really useful today to have your feedback of how we've been doing today and where we need to go tomorrow. If you don't want to do it into here, again, use the chat to do that, because certainly from my side and within the SPD team, we will certainly be making sure that what we've already designed for tomorrow does work. A reminder that where we started today was really starting with trying to actually look at what some of the success factors are in policy asks for business, and Ralph and Sebli gave us very contrasting but complementary stories to set us going, which then took us into talking through what the breakout rooms were going to be doing, and then essentially for most of today's session working in those three groups and then coming together at the end to try and make sense of those together. So it's been only half a day, and I have to say, sitting where I'm at, it feels like it's been a whole day, at least one day, but it's only been half a day. If you want to feed back into the whiteboard, do, but clearly maybe you don't like the whiteboard, which is also a good experiment on virtual tools that people do or they don't like them. Do use the chat as well, or send us or send me an email about how you think if we need to be reconsidering what we really need to consider for tomorrow. We are then going to amazingly finish a little bit early today, and it's sort of because there's been quite a few pleas of people saying, oh, wouldn't that be amazing if we had this gift of an extra 30 minutes in our lives? So we're gifting ourselves 30 minutes. And I'm seeing Katrine who's saying, can we receive the outcome of the breakout sessions in advance of tomorrow's discussions? Absolutely. We will put up on the SharePoint what's been noted today, but we'll also email a version to you as well. And you probably don't want to see any more of our emails, but the email will be coming. So it's a bit of a difficult relationship, more emails, less emails, but certainly we shall do that. So we'll be sharing what we've come to so far. Thank you very much, everybody. I think that brings us to the end of today. Wow. We'll leave this whiteboard open just, for another 10 minutes or so up on the screen. If that's okay with you tomorrow, then those who want to stick around can continue to enter into it. That's really be great. Incredible progress today. You're all welcome to turn your cameras on. You're all welcome to unmute yourselves and to talk to each other on top of each other at the end of the day as well. No etiquette at this point.